Hello and welcome back to This Complex Life. This episode has a little ears warning. We discuss some explicit content, so if you have some little ears listening, best to listen to it at another time. Have you ever wondered why your desire doesn't match what you see in the movies? Or perhaps your sex life doesn't quite seem like what everyone else is doing? It can be really confusing, and you're not alone. The truth is, most about what we know or think we know or believe about women's desire is total crap. There are so many myths out there that leave people or leave us feeling inadequate, broken, like there's something wrong with us, or that we're not doing what someone else or other couples should be doing or are doing. So today, I want to tear some of those myths apart and start talking about what really drives intimacy and desire. If you've ever questioned your own sexual desire or the pressure to perform, then this is for you. Welcome to today's episode where we're diving deep into the myths surrounding women's sexuality, from the pressure to experience spontaneous desire to the myth of a perfect sexual encounter. These misconceptions can shape how women see themselves and their relationships. There are so many myths and misconceptions out there that really shape how women experience sex and pleasure. These myths and misconceptions can shape how women see themselves and their relationships. I'm going to draw on some insights from the Gottmans, from Emily, from Esther Perel, some of the resources that I use in my work with couples to help explore intimacy, connection, and sex. By exploring emotional intimacy, communication, and understanding the different types of desire, we can transform the way we think about sex and intimacy. Sex myths are so prevalent, and I come across these a lot in my work as a couples therapist. They don't just affect couples, but they affect individuals, their sense of self, their identity, their willingness to be intimate, and it can create a lot of worry, fear, and anxiety. And we know it's not a surprise that we don't have great sex education. And for those who might have had some, it probably didn't cover desire, pleasure, anything even remotely close to maybe how to start a conversation around sex, how to talk about what feels good, how to explore your body and other people's bodies. There was none of that. I mean, I had, I think, one class on sexual health, and it was run by our school reverend, and it was very STDs, STIs, babies, how to put a condom on a banana, or I don't even know if there were bananas, but that seems to be a thing from the movies. But anyway, different types of contraception, and that's it. Very kind of health, biology, nothing around consent, which it's great that that's changed. There was nothing around pleasure. That wasn't even a word. That was not even something I would have spoken about until I started training in couples therapy. There wasn't any conversations about this. Even in my undergraduate degree or my master's degree, there was not a single topic around sex or sexual health. So there is a big gap. There is a big gap for health professionals, and there's an even bigger gap for the general public. We don't talk about this. We don't know about it. And if we're not talking about it and we're not getting our information from reputable sources, it's likely that people are getting it from their partners or from porn. And we know that that's not great. But I'm not going to talk about porn today. Let's start getting into some of these myths. There are a few sort of experts in this area that I like to draw on their research. They all offer different perspectives, and no one has the solution. No one resource has all of the solutions, but combined, they can be really useful to pick and choose what's working for you and what you might need. One of my favorites is the work by John and Julie Gottman. As a couples therapist who uses the Gottman approach, I love their work. They have some really great resources. And one of the things they talk a lot about is the importance of fondness and admiration and a deep friendship in building intimacy. They focus on emotional intimacy as being a significant building block to then lead into sexual intimacy. And they talk about a strong friendship, bids for connection, knowing each other's worlds, having shared meaning, having shared dreams as being part of a healthy relationship. Relationships that have a strong friendship often have a good sexual relationship as well. And their work really centers around building that relationship and that connection with couples. They've also got some really good resources on working through and healing a relationship after an affair or infidelity. And they've got some really great things out there as well. So if you're recovering from an affair and infidelity in your relationship, check out a Gottman trained couples therapist. They will be a really great resource for that. The next person who's contributed a lot to this space is Esther Perel, and I love her work. She's got a couple of really great books. Her first one is Mating in Captivity, which I read several years ago for the first time, and I loved it. It was quite challenging. It provoked a lot of deep thoughts for me and things I'd never thought about. And then her second book, State of Affairs, looks at infidelity and affairs and secrets and the impact of these across different relationships, why some people have affairs, and they're not as cliche as you might think. They're not as simple as you might believe, and they're very complicated, and they're really good books. They're really great things that I recommend. A lot of her work centers around this idea that we need both fantasy and fun and play and stability, connection, intimacy, that we need to have this tension between the two, between safety and trust and novelty and excitement. That love and desire has to have this kind of tension. And the third noteworthy expert in the field is Emily Nagoski. She's a well-known sex educator, researcher, and her work focuses on women's sexual well-being, particularly on understanding desire, arousal, and sexual health, and how they're influenced by biological, psychological, and cultural factors. So some of the common myths that I have come across in my work, and I've probably had some of these myself, and I'm going to be talking about relationships, so couples, sexual encounters with one night stands or friends with benefits. There's a range of different ways that people engage in sex, and we can cover those in later episodes. But for now, I'm going to be talking about relationships. One of the myths is that there is a perfect sexual experience. There's no perfect sexual experience. The myth that there's a perfect experience that's spontaneous, flawless, or always orgasmic is false. It doesn't always work like that. Intimacy builds over time. We need open communication and connection. And we don't need to adhere to a specific sexual script. And I'm going to talk a little bit about desire in just a moment. But there's no perfect sexual encounter. And we need to let go of that. Sex is clumsy and messy and funny, and bodies move in different ways. There can be funny noises and sounds, and it's not this flawless, perfect thing that you imagine. So to myth bust this, I want to draw on John and Julie Gottman's work. They've extensively studied couples over the decades through the Love Lab, and their research finds that couples who engage in regular bids for connection, and there are some resources about that you can find. I've done a podcast episode on that and some other resources on my website. Their research finds that couples who engage in regular bids for connection, the small gestures like asking about each other's day, showing an interest in each other's feelings, tend to have stronger emotional intimacy. This emotional closeness correlates with high sexual satisfaction because both partners feel safe, understood, and valued in their relationship. In their book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, the Gottmans explain that emotional connection is a foundation for a fulfilling relationship, including the sexual aspect. Emotional safety allows for vulnerability, which is key to intimacy, both emotionally and physically. So instead of striving for the perfect sexual encounter, couples should focus on open communication, vulnerability, and emotional intimacy. This shift can help reduce the pressure to perform and seeing sex as a performance, and encourages authentic connection instead. Mutual respect, understanding, open communication, and knowing each other's needs are key to a healthy sexual relationship. The myth that passion should be automatic or that certain rules define a good sexual experience is simply not true. So there's a big role of emotional intimacy in sexual satisfaction. If you want to have better sex with your partner, it starts outside the bedroom. It starts with open communication, dialogue, and listening. Sexual satisfaction grows when partners invest in emotional closeness. When people feel more emotionally supported and connected, they're more likely to experience pleasure and communicate their needs without fear or shame. What about when there's a desire discrepancy? I want to talk about the myth of low libido, and Emily Nagoski's work is excellent for this. She talks a lot about the different ways in which arousal can work, and she makes an important distinction between spontaneous desire the kind of desire that's portrayed in movies, where sexual thoughts or urges appear seemingly out of nowhere and you just have to have that person right away. And then there's responsive desire, where arousal builds after intimacy or sexual activity begins. And this is really important because there is a myth surrounding spontaneous desire and responsive desire. It's There is a gender skew here, and sometimes women feel like they just don't have a high libido, or their partners might feel rejected if they're not experiencing that spontaneous desire. But the thing is, a lot of women experience responsive desire, which is just as valid as spontaneous desire. And her research highlights that women believe that there's something wrong with them if their desire doesn't match what they see in movies. If they don't have that spontaneous desire, they might feel like they're doing something wrong, or that maybe there's something wrong with their relationship. It could lead to feelings of shame, inadequacy, and maybe a reluctance to engage in any sexual activity. So it's really important to understand that desire works differently for different people. And some people might not feel desire until they're already engaged in physical affection, and that's okay. Let's talk about this in terms of a scenario so we can really try and understand what's going on here. Let's picture Sarah. She is in a loving relationship with her partner Alex, and after a few years together, Sarah starts to worry about her lack of spontaneous sexual desire. She notices that, unlike when they were first together, she rarely feels that overwhelming urge for sex like she used to when they first started dating. Alex sometimes initiates intimacy, but Sarah worries her hesitation means there's something wrong with her libido. Reflecting on how spontaneous desire is often portrayed in the media, Sarah starts to believe that she's broken or has lost interest in Alex. Now, imagine if Sarah learns about responsive desire, how amazing that could be for her understanding of herself and her relationship with Alex. She might realize that her desire is sparked through affection, through touching, through kissing, or even sharing an intimate conversation. Her desire might not be one that ignites out of the blue, and that's okay. It can happen. Physical affection starts, and then that desire can grow. By having this understanding and then sharing it with her partner, it can really change the conversation. If her partner had no idea that there were two different types of desires, and he felt like, she's no longer feeling attracted to me, maybe there's something wrong with me, does it mean there's something wrong with the relationship? And she might be thinking some of those same things. So understanding that desire can change. You might have had one at the start of the relationship or another, and there's a whole bunch more things in her book around what accelerates and what breaks that desire. We're not going to get into that today, maybe for another episode. But it can be really helpful to understand these things about ourselves, about our biology, about our bodies, and to be able to talk about them with our partner, because the absence of that can really lead to conflict. However, in most cases, when I see it come through my therapy room, people aren't fighting about it. They're simply not talking about it. And sometimes months or even years can go by without the couple having had sex before they even come to seek support. So, whose role is it to maintain sexual health in the relationship? Sometimes this is put onto women and women are seen as the gatekeepers of sex and as being responsible for maintaining desire. And that's simply not true. It takes both people. Both parties need to be invested in maintaining a healthy sexual relationship. It's not a one-sided thing. We don't want to create these unrealistic pressures and expectations for women to be performing sex in a certain way in order to have fulfilling relationships. Sexual responsibility is shared. Both parties are responsible for maintaining sexual health and satisfaction in the relationship. And so this involves understanding your desire and building on the foundations of your relationship. Connection, intimacy, conversation, bids for connection, all of those things go into having a fulfilling sex life. But Marie, I'm in a long-term relationship and that just kills sex. I would like to challenge that. And Esther Perel's work is really great for understanding this and trying to bust this myth that long-term relationships kill sexual desire. Sure, desire can fade and can wane, but just like with anything, what we put a spotlight on, but just like so many things in our relationships or in life, we need to invest time in these things. So you can't Expect a plant to grow without watering it, without giving it sunlight, without giving it the proper nutrients. Some plants need a lot more tender care than others. You might have a cactus that needs a little bit of water, or you might have a plant that needs lots of sunlight, lots of water, and is very sensitive to changes in the temperature. The point is, things need to be tended to, and relationships are no different. Esther Perel's take on this is a little bit different to some of the other researchers and couples therapists in the field. She talks about this idea of separateness and togetherness, of intimacy and we-ness and individuality. And I find this really amazing because it kind of makes sense. So one of the things she talks about is that seeing your partner through new eyes can ignite desire again. So creating opportunities for mystery, for novelty, for autonomy within relationships is really important for maintaining desire. And she stresses this point that long-term relationships, they don't just automatically die. They require intentional effort to maintain, and to maintain desire by embracing independence and allowing space for each partner to be their own person. Couples creating space by pursuing personal growth or individual interests, and how that can reignite attraction and sexual desire over time. So, what that looks like practically is having maybe a hobby or an interest, or getting dressed up to go out with friends. It could be going dancing, it could be going to the gym. It's having things that you do separately and then coming back to each other. Maybe you go watch your partner do a presentation when they're speaking at a conference. Maybe you see them do something outside of the family home. It's finding ways to keep that novelty and excitement there. It could be role playing, it could be fantasies, it could be having staycations or a weekend away where you do something that is different, that brings that novelty and that mystery back into the relationship. And there are some really great resources out there. Her book, Mating in Captivity, is a really great one if you want to learn a bit more. And the Gottmans have a really great app called the Love Deck, or the Love Deck app, something like that, that has some really great questions on sex that you can go through with your partner. So hopefully that's been a bit of a taster about some of the myths around sex. If you want to hear more, let me know. I'd love to know what you're interested in and what you want to learn more about. And if you have a question that you want answered, send me a message, send me an email, or fill out the anonymous form on the website and I will try and answer it. Thank you for listening. To keep the conversation going, head on over to Instagram or LinkedIn and follow me. If you'd like to keep updated with episodes and other interesting things happening in mental health, join my weekly This Complex Life newsletter, where I'll share tools, tips and insight. There's a link in the show notes. Got a question you want answered? Shoot me an email or a DM. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a rating and a review. It helps other people find the podcast.